Yeah, sure. Anthony Falgu, live in Youngsville, Louisiana. I'm a member here in Lafayette with the Acadiana Fly Rodders. I met a bunch of you guys up in Natchitoches, like you said.
And of course, our guest speakers on it, we will introduce her in a bit. So
Yeah.
welcome, Anthony. Welcome.
Uh, how's the mixed bag doing?
All right, Mixed Bag has had a lot of actions. Mixed Bag has had 197 entries thus far, which beats our end of year total by 27 from a few years ago. And the cool thing about it is we're equal to the maximum number of people we've had participate, which is 23 at this point. And we have 9 people who have more than 10 fish or more. Still in the lead is Chris Williams with 29. These are the ones with more than 10. Aaron, who's on Zoom with us, is second with 24. I have 18. Ed Jones has 16. Jim Johnson has 15. Jeff Albrecht has 14. Noah Hoyt, who is Jim's grandson, has 12. And Tyler Hoyt, his other grandson, he has 9. So 12 is. So good participation, a lot of activity recently.
Oh, yeah. And remember, you don't have to catch 20-something fish to be a winner in the mixed bag challenge. Because
I'm counting on that. I only had 2 last year.
So way behind. But anyway, every entry that you make, and it ends the end of November, but every entry that you make goes into consolation drawing if you don't win. So you have a chance to win some nice prizes at our Christmas party.
They went 2 fly rods a couple of years ago, fly reel.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
It's good stuff. So the Christmas party is December 8th, by the way. So it's on our calendar, on our website, you can check. And we will be giving away the prizes for mixed bag at the event, and we'll also be doing the consolation drawing. Mixed bag. Yes.
Sunday.
No, it's December 9th.
Oh, it's a night, okay.
At what time?
6, I think.
Yeah, usually about 6:30.
Yeah.
We try to match the meeting time.
For college.
Yes.
So we match the hats,
What's that?
match the hats, food.
Yeah. We'll have the same things we've had in the past. It seems to be, the last 3 years that we've been there.
Been great.
It's been popular, so keep doing what we're doing.
And if you have anything you want to donate for like either silent auction or raffle items, that would be great.
Did you guys ever hear the story about the float tube I donated? No, gave it to Mike Carlin, went up in the attic, got the box, had float tube in it. Mike came by my office, I gave it to him, I said, use it for a giveaway or whatever, it's never been inflated. He called me the next day, he said, Frank, there's no float tube in this box. I said, what's in it? He said, a bunch of love letters between you and Debbie.
What's the pile level?
And I said,
Yeah.
well, I was working in Shreveport, she was still at Western. You know, this is 1970, 71. No internet, no cell phone. Yeah. And I said, well, imagine what happened to that float tube, Anyway, he graciously brought the box back to me in my office. My wife just happened to be there. And she goes, what are you doing with that box? I said, I was looking for that float tube. She said, I threw that away 5 years ago.
It was probably dry rot.
It probably was. But she put all those letters in there. Carl, being an ex-military guy, he very, he said, well, were you deployed then? I said, no, I was working radio and she was in college.
And no red, white, blue stripes on the envelopes.
You have to have Cindy's treasure too.
Okay, Cindy's not here tonight, so Bill.
We have $3,975.12 in the bank and no outstanding bills.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, FYI, this is a busy week not just for us, but the whole community. That's probably why turnout is low tonight. There's a whole conference going on next 2 weeks. Tomorrow evening at the farmers market on Alexander Jackson Street from here. It's kind of their fall celebration, and we've been invited to participate. So I'll have the tent out there, I'll have tables, and I'll be doing some casting. Anybody who wants to join me?
What time?
It starts at about 3 o'clock.
What time?
3 o'clock.
Okay.
3 o'clock, and then 5:30, we'll pack up and go.
What event is that?
That's the farmers market. It's every Tuesday afternoon,
Right.
across from the church over
Jackson,
there.
right about
Jackson Street, right. And, when you're there, you can get some good stuff, vegetables, bread, all kinds of stuff.
Flowers from the business.
Yeah, flowers and this. So, that's Tuesday, and then Saturday, we have National Hunter Fishing Day at Woodward, and that's gonna be, from 8:30 to 1:30. And, we'll be set up near the pond.
Same
This-
spot.
No, this year they actually moved this to the other side of that road. That's there, so we'll be close. We'll be about 50 feet from where we normally are. And so, we've had a few people volunteered, Carlton's one of them, that volunteered to be there Saturday. And so we'll do the usual bit, where we do some tying, do some casting, and so on.
And I showed up a week early for it, but I plan on being here again.
You were there this past Saturday. It's always the fourth Saturday in September. And that's because Congress delegated that. It's actually a congressional act that makes National Hunting and Fishing Day the fourth Saturday in September. So you can mark it on your calendar for next year, the year after, the year after that. It's always gonna be on the fourth Saturday. in September.
Good time to have it if you live in Montana. That great year, still 100 degrees.
Weather looks good here. Out of 83. that
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, it looks like, it's,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
yeah, normally it's as hot as heck out there.
Yeah.
This year, it's gonna be really nice. Nice weather. Speaking of nice weather, do you have any fishing reports? No fishing reports. I caught,
Jim's got one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
But I catch, I'm trying to think, I caught a rock bass Friday. That's the first one I ever caught.
Oh,
Saw
nice.
that.
Yeah, nice.
Of course, it was in Tennessee. I'm bid on the smallmouth though, so who knows? It's always in tomorrow.
Good.
and fishing hasn't been that great. I think the full moon has had a lot to do with it. I went to the dock the other day. I caught 3 crappie in about 30 minutes. And then nothing since I've gone early morning, noon, late afternoon, nothing gone. So who knows, but it could flip again. But usually what happens, and this is why I'm watching this weather this weekend. First time you get 60 degrees 2 nights in a row. The crappies moving to the shallows. They may have started already. Our guy in Toledo Bay is saying he's catching off the docks right now in T-Bend. So might happen over here on Coteau and Kincaid. And the Vernon, they had a kayak tournament this Saturday on Vernon. I was supposed to fish it, but I was babysitting. And they were looking for schooling bass, those guys in the kayaks. Couldn't find them. The 2 guys who won put up some nice strings. They had 88 inches, 77 inches, 5 bass. But everybody else was down in the 20s. Some people didn't catch anything at all. So,
Is that on Vernon Lake or?
yeah, Vernon. So apparently it's not quite happening yet. Party hasn't started yet, but it will start soon, I'm sure.
Bill Click posted, if you didn't see it on Facebook, a bunch of big bass out of Cattle Lake last week. He was catching 7 or 8 a day. So he has really nice 2 and 3 pounders.
That's further north, it's cold. Any other reports, any other items before we introduce our speaker?
Yeah, March Brown trip for next year has been put on the calendar, March 20th through 23rd. So put that on your calendar.
Okay, soon we'll have a board meeting, probably more of October, to talk about the calendar for next, Christmas party, the calendar for next year, maybe a couple other items that, I'll tell you all about it this week sometime.
Okay.
All
right.
With no further ado, we have via Zoom, our guest speaker, Karin Miller with Zen Tenkara. And she's the owner and founder of Zen Tenkara. How many of y'all know what Tenkara is? Okay. So there's some familiarity there.
Wait, I think I know what Tenkara is.
We'll let her
But we'll let her
explain
explain it to us, yes.
Explain it to you. She's live professor from Colorado. Karen, it's great to have you here, and we'll just let you get started. Tell us all about it.
Okay. So I'm just from a little bit, it's kind of hard to hear that the talking in the room. It's very quiet. So the people who are on Zoom, I can hear just fine, but in the room, it's just, you're farther away from the mic. But I think I got from that nobody really knows what Tenkara is. Is that
Some of us think we do, Karen.
okay?
You educate us.
Okay, so we're gonna do a little, what I call a crash course, and there's a lot to Tenkara, and I like to say first off that I fish with a rod and reel as well. I do freshwater, I do saltwater, but I really fell in love with fishing, fly fishing, through my experience with Tenkara, and that really got me started. And then I just kind of kept going, and now I will go almost anywhere to catch a different species, on a Tenkara rod or a rod and reel. So this is a Tenkara rod. This is actually a 12-foot Tenkara rod that I'm holding right now. So a Tenkara rod is a telescopic rod at the very basic level. If you want the really quick and simple version, it's a collapsible cane pole that is made out of carbon fiber, although it can vary, and is ultra light and is ultra flexible. So Tenkara rods, most of them are made from carbon fiber. Different manufacturers will use different kinds of carbon fiber, different grades, and that impacts the performance of the rod. But they all are telescoping, and they're all generally just a few ounces. So we have 7 models at Zen Tenkara. My lightest rod is 1.5 ounces. That's like holding a pencil almost. My biggest rod that I use for bonefish, tarpon, redfish, is about 3.25 ounces. So very, very lightweight. And they're different than a regular fly rod in that when the blanks are wrapped around mandrels, they don't have a spine and a belly like a traditional fly rod. So a traditional fly rod, is designed so that it casts along a singular plane in order to cast, most effectively. And that's why lining up those guides is important, not only so that your line can travel through it unhindered, but because that rod has a spine and a belly, and it's meant to go in a singular direction. Tenkara rods don't have a spine or belly, and so when they're wrapped on the mandrels, the sections, they will flex 360 degrees in any direction. Okay. All the rods, all Tenkara have a butt cap that comes unscrewed. And this is how you maintain your rod or repair it if you break a section. You see all of those pieces kind of look like little Russian nesting dolls. You know, all the pieces sit inside one another and come out completely. So you want to make sure that these sections stay clean, because when you open and close the rod, you don't want grit or grime or, sand particles to get in between those sections, or you'll end up getting little microfractures in your carbon fiber that can result in a break. But it's very easy. If I break my Tenkara rod, I can go online, go under rod repairs, pick my model, and say, oh, I need to replace section 5 on my Zacco rod. And it's $18 and it's shipped to you. So very easy to repair. The rods have a cap that comes out, and a lot of people want to open these kind of like a lightsaber, that's not a good idea, because all those sections nest and sit inside one another. The rod has to be opened in a certain order, and it has to be collapsed opposite of that. So when I open this rod, I like to tip it under my arm and just gently pull it out until the first little cord comes out. We call this a Lillian, and you can see I've put a little overhand knot in that cord. This is where we're going to attach. Okay. There's also a swivel tip. The swivels, not all Tenkara rods have that, but it does tangles and stress on your rod. Now, when I'm going to set this rod up, I don't need to open up 12 feet and then try to tie on my rod. That makes it hard to manage. So I'm going to use my finger and thumb, and I'm just going to drag my fingers along this as I pull it out until I hit the very first joint. I think you can see right here. There's that first section. So it's very small, very fine. I don't want to really yank on the sections. I just want them to be snug. So that's it. It's nice and snug. And when I let it go, it stays open. Now, this is where I like to set my rod up. And sometimes I tuck it between my knees. So I have, you can't quite see, but tuck it between my knees, and then look, no hands. Then I have 2 hands to attach my line onto my Lillian. When I attach my line onto that Lillian cord, then I'm going to attach tippet to my line, and then my fly to my tippet, and then I'm going to open the rod the rest of the sections. So I open it up section by section. If I want to close the rod, I have to do it the opposite way. So I'm opening it from smallest to the largest section down at the base. But when I close it, I want the biggest section to go in first, so that the next smallest section can fit inside of it, and then the next smallest, and then the next smallest. So I'm just going to go completely opposite. You want to always be careful about that last tip section, that fine joint. So I tell people to put their finger below and above the joint and give it a little press. So you don't want to hold it up here and try and push it in. I will show you just while I have this out. This tip is super, super flexible and fine. All right. So that's very different than a regular fly rod. Okay. So I'm going to share some screens and I'm going to show you a video of how to attach the line to that Lillian cord. Now, before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about lines, okay? So you have this 12-foot rod. Not all Tenkara rods are 12 feet. A very traditional Tenkara rod is long. So traditional Tenkara rods are roughly 12 feet, but they can be under 7 feet and they can be as long as 15 feet, okay? And any combination in there. The advantage to a long rod is that you have a fixed amount of line. And so the concept of Tenkara in its traditional form or traditional sense is I have a long rod with a short fixed line. So I can reach out over back eddies, I can reach out over rocks, and I can get to my target area with all the line being held off the surface of the water and only my fly touching the water. So ideally, you have this very pristine presentation with no drag, no disturbances, no spooking of fish. And if you're doing a dry fly type of a pattern, then it's this very natural presentation of this fly coming, from above, hitting the surface of the water with nothing else on the water except for your fly. So you end up getting, what I call this sort of triangle presentation. You have your angler standing here with their long fly rod, and then their short line coming here, and then their fly at the bottom. So you fish tip up so that you keep the line off the surface of the water, and then you just have your fly. Now, because you have this really, really soft, delicate tip section, you can do a lot of manipulations with your fly because these rods weighing only a few ounces, I can just do little taps on my rod like this, and I can get tremendous action on my rod tip. So you can create a lot of life and motion and movement with very minute little taps and motion on the fly rod to bring your fly to life. Make sense?
Yeah.
So far?
Yes.
How long is the line? You said short line, long rod. How long is the line?
So if you are fishing Tenkara traditionally, the rule of thumb, and there's always wiggle room, but the rule of thumb is that you're matching your line length to your line rod. So if I have a 12-foot rod, I would put anywhere between an 11 and 13-foot line on my rod, plus my tippet. The reason for that, one, is so that you can keep that line off the surface of the water, right? Because if you put a 20 or 30-foot line on a 12-foot rod, you can't hold that line off the surface of the water. So you lose the advantage. The other reason for matching the line length to the rod length is retrieval. You don't have a reel, right? So you've got to bring the fish in. If I have a 12-foot rod with a 12-foot line and I set my hook and I bring my fish in, I do this and my fish is right in front of me. So I simply grab the line, shake it if I've crimped the hook or net it or whatever. But my fish is going to be right there. If I have a 12-foot rod with a 30-foot line and I do this, my fish is still going to be out there. And we're going to talk about that because there is a trend for a lot of people to be throwing longer lines on Tenkara rods. It just means your retrieval becomes different because now you have to hand line that fish in. Because when I do this, my fish is still out there. But let's talk about that because that's going to change a little bit of the type of line you use. In the Tenkara world, there are a variety of different lines. And I would say the most sort of traditional line is like a furled, tapered leader. Okay. These are usually made out of a uni thread or something along that line. They can be braided, they can be furled. They are usually tapered and they have a little cord, which is the connection loop. And I'll show you how to attach that to that red Lillian cord on the rod. And not all of them, but many of them also have, I don't know if you can see that, a tippet ring at the end where you attach straight tippet. So this is an 11-foot line. I would use this on my 12-foot rod, and I would put anywhere between 18 inches and 5 feet of tippet, depending on where I was fishing and how, tight things are. That's traditional Tenkara. Now, these are great for learning because they're heavy. So they really, you feel the load. They're great for giving tactile feedback and cueing anglers, when to move their line forward. You really feel the load on the rod on these. They're also very good to learn because they are or sometimes even made out of Kevlar, very heavy and durable. These will absorb water and they will cue the angler to keep their rod tip up. So they're great to learn on because most fly anglers want to drop the tip of the rod, which is after they cast, they bring their rod tip down. In Tenkara, you generally, if you're fishing it traditionally, want to keep your rod tip up and your line off the surface of the water to get that pristine presentation. If these hit the water, they're going to absorb water eventually. And then when you cast, you're going to get a splash and you're going to spook fish. And so that's a cue and a reminder, tip up, tip up, tip up. But a lot of people like these because of the feedback. And they're great to learn on because of that feedback. So I kind of think of them as a great training and learning method. And when I started doing Tenkara, that was what I fished with. Well, then you start getting better and you want to challenge yourself. The next sort of opposite end of the spectrum in the Tenkara world is what we call Tenkara level line. And what this is is colored fluorocarbon. So this is 100% fluorocarbon. It comes in different diameters from a 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, and 5. That refers to the diameter. And I don't know if this will show up on the screen. Let's see. But that is like casting mono, if you can see that there.
We can.
So very, very light. So this is going to be your most delicate presentation. If you want to cast teeny little dry flies or manipulate a reverse hackle, Sakasa Kabari, and you know, you're fishing in small streams and want that just beautiful traditional presentation, this is your weapon. The other, I should say, positive about this is it comes in a spool. So this is 50-meter spool. And so I can just pull off however long I want my line to be and attach it to my rod. So I can customize my lines, make them whatever length I need or I want for this situation. And I've got 50 meters of it. So this will last me a really long time. The downside about this is it's friggin' annoying to deal with. You know, casting mono takes a lot of finesse. And so it's a very, very quick flicky motion when you cast this because there is no weight to this whatsoever. And so it is not going to load your rod, even a very ultralight, flimsy Tenkara rod. So you have to really change your cast in order to load your rod through your acceleration and your stroke versus the weight of this, if that makes sense. The other kind of part that can be annoying with Tenkara level line is that it has no connection loops. And so I'm going to be tying a whole lot more knots. I can make the line whatever length I want, but there are no loops or tippet rings. So if you don't like tying knots, this is probably not something you're going to enjoy because this is something that you have to, you know, every time you strip off a mount, you have to attach it to your rod. So because I really didn't enjoy this, and I'm in Colorado, which I fish in a lot of canyons, and there's always wind. And this is so light that sometimes it's very hard even to keep your fly on the surface of the water. And because it's fluorocarbon, if I'm using a dry fly and I want to avoid the wind and try to stick to the surface of the water, it's going to drag my fly down. So I wanted something that was sort of had the connection loops of this and the ease, but had the light presentation as this. And that's where we came up with hybrid lines. So these are an all-purpose line, lighter than a furled line, but denser than level line, without the memory, doesn't absorb water, floats, and has connection loops because I'm getting old and my eyes are going bad and I hate knots. So this has a large connection loop at one end. It has a small tippet. It has a small loop at the other end, plus a tippet ring, if you can see that. And it's not really showing the color, but this is a high-vis orange. I don't know why it's not really showing it on my video. So it has 8 section of a high-vis portion of the line. And you can see there's very little memory in this line. This is also a floating line. Because I like to cast longer lines on my Tenkara rod. And so when I lay it on the surface of the water, or if I need to avoid the wind and lay it and stick it on the surface of the water, I need my line to float. There are also things like fusion lines, which are much longer lines, heavier weight, between roughly 5 weight and 8 weight lines. And they have connection loops and small loops for leaders, and they are for casting long distance. So lines in the Tenkara world are very much a personal preference. Everybody has the lines they like. But let's jump over to a video and just show you how you use that larger connection loop to attach it to Lillian. All right. Let's hope my video works. Let's see. All right. Do we all see a permit?
Yes.
I did not catch that on a Tenkara rod. But I do put that there at the beginning of my video because I like people to know that I do use a rod and reel. And I have there's no reason to choose. You can be happy with both. All right. What I want to show you is this. All right, so I'm going to open up my rod, take out that Lillian cord, just that first section. I put it between my knees, but you can find your own place. There's that little overhand knot that I put in the cord. I open that large connection loop, put my fingers through, grab the line, pull it through to make a little hitch. I like to snug it down just because it's easier to work. I put it around my Lillian cord, right up through the middle. And then I'm going to wrap that little Lillian cord around my loop one more time. So it's a double twist. And then I just cinch it down. My rod and line are now attached. Pretty simple.
Yes.
Do we do that again?
It is, nice. Yeah.
One more, we'll do it one more time just so that you. So it's very, very easy. Switching out a line only takes a second. If you find you need to switch your line. Most Tenkara anglers will carry 2 or 3 different lengths. There's my little overhand knot. You add that, you put that on your Lillian once you get the rod. Open my big loop, grab my line, pull it through. I have my little girth hitch. I snug it up, make it easier to work with. Put it around my Lillian cord. Right up the middle of the loop. And then I'm going to wrap it one more time. Some people do not do a double wrap. I highly recommend it. It's a little security wrap. And it's going to ensure that your line does not come off, along with that overhand knot on the Lillian. And there you go. Easy peasy. All right. Okay. So when it comes to setting your rod up, once you've got your line attached, and I would say if you were going to start off, it's probably easier to start with a shorter line because it's easier to manage and it's easier to land fish. So to begin, I usually tell people go with a traditional Tenkara setup, match the length of your rod or your line to the length of your rod to learn on. When it comes to after you've attached your line, then from the small tippet loop on down, you pretty much can do whatever you want. There are Tenkara flies. We refer to them in the US as kabari, but kabari is just a term for fly, a Japanese term for fly. And when we in America talk about Tenkara flies, we often talk about reverse hackle flies. And a reverse hackle fly, is something along that line. And it's literally a simple fly. You can do a variety of things with it, but it's usually a very basic form is just wrapping the shank and then having your hackle face outward rather than back towards the curve. And the idea or the benefit of that reverse hackle is that it creates action and motion in the water. So if you imagine you have this long rod with this short line, everything's off the surface of the water. You have a very tight setup, right? There's no slack in your line. And you have this fly with a reverse hackle that it's if you put a little float in on it, depending on which ones, they'll stay on the surface for a while. But for the most part, they will sink, but sort of subsurface. So anywhere from like 3 to 8 inches. They're not a very heavy fly. And generally, you want to use those flies in faster moving water, right? Where you have opportunistic feeding and the fish can't look at this for too long and say, that doesn't look like a bug, right? It's more of an attractor pattern. But you can take your Tenkara rod and just do little taps on the end and create motion so that this reverse hackle opens and closes and pulses and moves in the water. Now, when I first started fishing Tenkara, I was up in Rocky Mountain National Park a lot, fishing wild, stupid, hungry trout. And they would eat these really, aggressively. And it worked really well in those small, fast-moving streams. You come down into town a little bit and you present this, on water that gets pressured more or maybe isn't moving as fast and the fish, have time to really examine it. They're not just coming out from a holding spot like from behind a rock. They're actually sitting in a seam and feeding. Then these don't work as well. My go-to on a Tenkara rod is a dry dropper. I throw streamers, I throw nymphs, I throw terrestrials, I throw dry droppers. I've even thrown on mouse patterns on my Tenkara rod. And, with a tight line setup, you've got a lot of control over over making that mouse move. So I tell people, you can tie on whatever you want. There are no rules. If you want to go the traditional route, go the traditional route. But, if you want to throw a streamer pattern or a mouse pattern, you can do that. You have a lot of control on your Tenkara rods. And all of the all of the presentations, whoops. Let's see, go back to here. All of the presentations that you would normally do on a fly rod, like a dead drift, a pause and drift, skating the fly, downstream, you know, pulsing, swinging, Linsinger lift, all of those things you can also do on a Tenkara rod. So there are no limitations for that. All right. So casting on a Tenkara rod is the same. So the mechanics are identical. And in fact, last week I did a presentation on the science of fly fishing, which was the first time I'd ever been asked to do that. I had to really think about it, but it was all about casting. And you know, your fly rod is a tool, and a tool stores or uses energy. And you have to get that energy from somewhere out of the rod. So you have to apply a force. And your fly line and your stroke is your force. Your fly line is the mass and your stroke is the acceleration. Mass times acceleration equals force. It seems so simple, right? But it isn't. And in order to make a fly rod or a baseball bat or a golf club work, right, there has to be certain things in place. It really boils down to physics. But the mechanics of a cast are the same. There's a stroke, there's a stop, and there's an arc that's created. And those can all vary, right? Depending on the distance you want to cast, the weight of the rod you're using, the line, all of those things. If I'm going to go cast my, 5-weight fly rod and I'm going to cast 40 feet, right? People will say 10 to 2, and it's your, you have your stroke. Well, a Tenkara rod is long and flexible, right? We already said that. And it's super light, so it doesn't take a lot to move it or accelerate it. And then it's got that really flimsy tip, right? So when I cast a Tenkara rod, in general, especially if I'm casting a short line, a traditional set, I have this, if I'm casting mono or even, one of these other lines, they're so light and they're short. And I've got this super flimsy rod with this super delicate tip that, that bends. So I don't have to have a big stroke. In fact, the stroke is so small and the force applied to it is so small that I really don't even need my shoulder involved. So when we cast a Tenkara rod for a traditional short line setup, we use our wrist. And so the cast is more like this. And that's the arc that I'm making.
Ought to be good at that.
Lost her.
We can't hear you.
It's our bandwidth.
You can't hear me?
No, we can't.
It's our bandwidth, Karen.
Yes.
Go ahead, you're good.
Okay. But if I take this same rod and I put on a 25-foot fusion line, which is like a 5-weight fly line, and 8 feet of a leader tippet setup, and now I cast, this isn't going to cast that line. So I have to adapt my stroke for the line that I'm casting. So it's still a slower cast than most fly rods because the rods are so flexible. So it's almost like casting a bamboo rod when you put on a longer or heavier line. But then I go from this to this. And I'm going to show you those different casts right now in the video. And I hope our bandwidth works. So I'm going to share the screen again. And we're going to look at 3 different casts. The first one is a short traditional Tenkara line. The second is a mid-weight. My computer is doing something. And the third is a long, I think it's a 25 or 28-foot line. Now, I'm also going to show you how the grip changes. So let me share this. All right. So when I'm casting a very short ultralight line, I do what I call a precision grasp with my finger, my index finger on top of the rod. And I'm actually going to point to where I want my fly to go. That encourages me to stay out of my shoulder and use my wrist. And that's great if you have shoulder problems or issues, because you can keep your elbow down to your side, and then you're just doing a little flick cast with your wrist. As my line gets longer and heavier, I'm going to want to engage my shoulder more and my elbow. And so then I'm going to change my grasp into what we call more of a power grip, or more of a traditional fly casting grasp. Okay. So let's look at a short traditional cast. This is, I think, an 11-foot line on a 12-foot rod. All I'm really doing is using my wrist. My elbow and shoulder are stationary, and I'm almost throwing the rod straight up. My rod stops at 12. And it's very small and very easy. The line almost goes diagonal. And you can see that triangle that I was talking about as the tip of the line hits the water. You can also do bow and arrow casts and get into tight spots. Really easy. So those short Tenkara lines are great for pool and pocket water. Backhand, you can even change your hand and cast to be able to get under brush from a different angle. Because remember, there's no spine on these rods. So you can cast them from either hand, and you don't have to worry about a retrieve. Okay. Now, let's see how it changes on a mid-length line. The pause in the back is going to be a little bit longer. I'm still using a precision grasp, but I'm using my elbow just a little bit longer, a little bit more, I should say. Still pretty wristy. The arc, you can see the change maybe is a little bit bigger. And you're laying the line out equally on both sides. Backhand casts get different angles still, but you've got a longer reach. Now we're going to go to a longer cast. And you're going to see it starts to look very much like a regular fly cast. I instinctually change my grasp, you'll see. Now it's more my thumb up top. My stroke is bigger. And now I'm doing a full back cast. And it doesn't take much to move that line. You still want to end all of these casts with your tip slightly up, because that tip, when it unfolds, you want it to shoot the line out instead of down towards the ground. All right. So very, very easy.
Hey, Karen, can you hear me?
Say again.
Let me get a little closer. Do you ever have an issue with tailing loops if you have too much application of power on a Tenkara, like you would on a conventional rod?
And certainly if if you're casting a long line and you are usually, a tailing loop isn't necessarily caused by the power. It's usually caused by the shape of your arc. So, and the shape of your arc deteriorates as you put more power into it. So if we're pushing, really hard on our stroke, we tend to come down and up with our stroke. And that's what causes the tailing loop. It changes the shape of that loop. It brings your line down, and then your fly line catches and tangles. So in Tenkara, it's no different than a regular fly rod. When we cast, our stroke should be horizontal, right? It shouldn't be arced like this or like this. It should be straight, almost like a push and a pull. But your stroke should be a horizontal line with a firm stop in the front and a firm stop in the back. And that's the same. That's the same on a rod and reel or a Tenkara. There's no difference. The difference is that your stroke is generally smaller because you've got this super flexible rod. And I don't have to put as much power into it because I have this ultralight, super flexible rod with an ultralight line. So most people overpower their Tenkara rods. I say, cut it in half, cut that in half, cut that in half, and now cut that in half. And that's the power that you have to put into a Tenkara rod to get this effort, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let's keep going. Are there any other questions so far?
We're good.
We're
Good.
Excellent job so far.
All right, okay. It's like I said, it's a little hard to hear, everybody in the room. So great. All right, let's keep going a little bit. All right. All right. Oops. As having layers. First layer is you have to know where fish are, because I was surprised when I first started to learn that they aren't everywhere in a river. Right? Fish like to hang out in certain spots, and different fish hang out in different spots. They have to know where fish are. Then you have to be able to reach fish, and you reach fish by casting, right? Then the third layer is that you have to get a fish to move or to strike, right? So that's your fly and presentation. If you can actually get that fish to want to go after whatever you're serving them. And the fourth layer is the hook set. So hook set is all about tactile feed or feedback, right? It's either seeing your indicator move or your fly move or a fish come up and to take your fly, or it's a sensation on your line or your rod, right? That something's pulling or tugging or nibbling. And I like to say Tenkara is the difference between doing surgery in a surgical glove or a knit mitten, the tactile feedback that you get on a Tenkara rod is like mind-blowing compared to a regular fly rod. I remember when I was first learning to fish, I would be standing in the river with my line in the water, and my friend, who was teaching me would give me a bap on the shoulder and say, "That's a fish." And I was like, "Huh? What? That was a fish. That was a fish. Set your hook. Set your hook. That's a fish." And I didn't even recognize the takes, especially on nymphing, because they were so subtle, or I'd be like, "Oh, that was a rock." No, that was a fish. Yeah, that was oh, I just hit the bottom. No, that was a fish, right? And so if you don't even recognize when a fish is hitting your fly, you don't even have the opportunity to try to set the hook. Because by the time you register it, the opportunity is gone, right? The fish is long gone. With a Tenkara rod, because they're, just a few ounces, and they're these hollow carbon fiber tubes that weigh 2 ounces, you feel everything. You don't have guides. You don't have a reel, heavy reel. You don't have a line running up the exterior of your rod. You have a line that's attached directly to the tip of this ultra fine tip section, and you can just put your finger barely on the rod tip, on the carbon fiber, and I'm telling you, you can feel everything. I mean, if I do this on the end of my rod, I can make huge motions on the tip of my rod and in my fly. So imagine what I can feel when a fish is hitting. So you feel those takes faster, easier, and because you actually recognize them as fish, as hits, you have the opportunity to practice that motor reflex of setting the hook, setting the hook, setting the hook, right? Because you actually know when a fish is hitting it. If you never recognize that a fish is at the end of your line, or you miss those opportunities, then you're actually missing the opportunity to practice a quick reflex action. You know, that's what setting a hook is. Setting a hook is nothing more than a motorical reflex, right? It's a fast action muscle reflex. And in order to get good at that, you have to practice it. And you can't practice it if you're not recognizing those hits. So definitely for beginners, they're going to get better at their hook set faster, simply because they can feel it and they can at least choose to try to respond with a motor reflex action. Does that make sense?
Yes.
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 All right, let's keep going. All right. The other thing I will say is that when you have a very short line on a long rod, right, there's no slack in the line. Everything is tight. It's off the surface of the water. Just your fly is touching. So when a fish actually takes your fly, it almost sets itself. Your hook set is really just a flick of the wrist. And what you're doing at that point pretty much is just compensating for that soft tip action, that bend in the tip when a fish takes your fly. You're just compensating by flicking in the opposite direction. In fact, I've actually been fishing with people, teaching them, and we call it the fish relocation program, because they overset the hook so hard, they end up shooting the fish into the air behind them, you know, launching it into the sky because they've set the hook too hard on these ultra flexy Tenkara rods. So it doesn't take much. But the longer the line, the more pronounced your hook set has to be. If I have a 11-foot line with 4 feet of tippet and everything is tight, my hook set is pretty minimal in order to get the job done. But if I want to take a 12-foot rod and now I'm casting a 30-foot line or setup, and that line is laying on the surface of the water and I'm fishing untraditionally, or what we call American style, then I'm compensating for surface tension, right? Because my line is laying on the surface of the water. And now I'm moving 30 feet of line versus 11 feet of line. So my hook set has to be more pronounced. And I still have to compensate for the flexi tip section. Okay. All right. Okay. People think Tenkara is just for small fish, but you can catch some really big fish on Tenkara rods. I can go to Alaska and spend an entire week catching rainbows and chum. I've done sockeye, graylings, char, dolly varden, all on Tenkara rods. Tenkara, if you like doing float trips, and you know, drift boat, it's amazing because you can get a pristine drift. You don't even need an indicator, and you never have to mend your line. So the drift that you're going to get is unhindered and natural, and you will be amazed at how effective it is, and how your catch rate will go up. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the play in fish management. And I call it the power curve, the fishing triangle. And this little picture on off to the side is, what I think about, like when a fish runs, right, on a rod. Sometimes you hook into a fish and you've got this triangle where you're in control, but as the fish runs, that triangle collapses. So this is what I call fish geometry. So anytime you hook into a fish, you create a triangle, right? There's the angler, there's the fish, and then there's the tip of your rod. And no matter where that fish goes, as long as you're connected, you have this triangle, the fishing triangle, right? Now I'm really going to blow your mind with pictures. So this is my little rainbow of control, I call it. So the green area is your happy place. It's your zone of control. From about 120 degrees to about 50 degrees, maybe 45, You are in control when you are connected to a fish. Now, this is on a rod and a reel. We're not talking about Tenkara right now. You hook into a trout or some other species, a bass, a crappie, and when you're in roughly a 90-degree angle from your rod tip to the fish, you are in the most control over the fish. That's your happy place. If the fish runs and he starts to take line, you tend to drop your rod. And that angle between the rod tip and the fish is reduced. Now, if that fish was really going to run, right, and just strip line off of your reel, you're not in control at that point, really. You're just hanging on, right? And this is how we land fish on a rod and a reel. We cast, we hook into a fish, we play. Ooh, we're up here. Ooh, we play a little, right? Whoa, whoa. This is our happy spot. The fish runs. Whoa, he's running. Wow, he's going to spool me. He gets tired and pauses, or you feel hesitation, right? That's your cue to start reeling. So you start reeling your rod, and as you reel, what do? You bring your rod back up to about 90 degrees, roughly, You're about in my happy zone. Whoa, I play again. Oh, he's got another run. He runs, I lower my rod tip, the fish takes line, and he eventually gets tired, and then I start to reel, and I bring him back up. Until we do this over and over again, until the fish is exhausted, right? And we bring him in. And when we bring him in, I'm sure you've all seen it in, fly fishing magazines, right? There's the photo of the guy on this big fish, and he's way back like this, like this. Because even when he's landing the fish, as the fish comes in closer, he's opening that angle between his rod tip and the fish to keep it at least 90 degrees or more so that he can land the fish and stay in control. Okay? This is all fine and dandy. And this is the same in Tenkara, except for a slight difference. All right. So we've got our fish, and he runs, and we're in the danger zone, right? And on a Tenkara rod, when I go to land my fish, if I go way back up into my happy zone, do you remember my flexi tip on the end of that soft Tenkara rod up top? Well, guess what? That's going to break. It's going to snap, even though I'm in 90 degrees and I'm in my happy zone. On a Tenkara rod, you can't play up vertically. Now, if you've got, an 8 or 6 inch fish, you're fine on the tip. But if you hook into a 16, an 18, a 24 inch something or other, whatever your species is, and you try to control or manage or land that fish up above, then this is what we call candy caning in the Tenkara world. You're turning your rod into a candy cane, right? A candy cane is straight, and then the very end of it has a curve. So what you're doing is overloading the top section and underutilizing the lower portion of your Tenkara rod, right? You're not getting into the belly of the rod. You're not getting into the backbone of the rod. You're just trying to control a fish on the softest, flexiest, most delicate section of the rod. So how do we fix it? On a Tenkara rod, we play to the side. When we play to the side, that immediately puts us into a 90-degree angle with the fish. And it spreads and disperses the load of that fish along the entire length of the rod. That is the zone of control. So I am playing about 45 degrees off the surface of the water. I have my 3-point triangle. There's me, there's my rod tip, and then there's the fish. And I'm at about 90 degrees. That's my zone of control. That's where I'm using the entire rod, right? If I have a 12-foot rod, why am I only trying to control the fish with 2 feet of it? Control the rod, or controlling the fish, means using all 12 feet. This is what it looks like when your triangle is collapsing. I'm out of my 90 degrees, and the fish is going to straighten my rod out. If the fish straightens my rod out, there is nothing I can do because I don't have a reel full of line. So in Tenkara, we have that same zone of control, except we want to play along a different plane, right? So instead of playing vertically overhead, we're going to play to the side. So now when this fish runs, this fish is trying, right? If the fish wins, it's a battle, right? If the fish wins, my rod is going to be completely straight. And he's going to shoot out, pop my tippet, and be gone. So as this fish starts to overpower me, right? I want you to look at that zone of control and where it shifts. I'm in my happy place. Here's my 90-degree triangle. I've hooked into a big bad boy, and he starts to really pull, and he's trying to run. My zone of control shifts. In this moment, I need to pull my rod back in order to open up my 90-degree angle. I can't let it collapse. If it goes past about 45 degrees, I'm pretty screwed. Unless I start running after the fish, if I can regain. So at this point, if I notice it and I can respond fast enough, I can pull my rod back and bring it back in to 90 degrees and stay in control of the fish. This fish is really big. It's really pulling. Now look where my zone of control has moved. So at this point, I can pull my rod tip all the way back to the left, which is going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on my rod, okay? I'm on my fish. My fish wants to do that to my Tenkara rod and swim away. As I lose ground and this angle between my rod tip and the fish starts to collapse, I can pull back and reopen that angle. But that puts a lot of pressure on my rod. And it's generally not going to put pressure on the tip. It's going to put pressure down low. Now, if I trust my rod and I know its flex capability, if I'm comfortable and familiar with it, I can pull back on my rod tip and push my butt handle to try and keep that pressure on the fish. I have to know my rod limits. Now, I can relieve some of the pressure on my rod if, as that fish tries to pull me, I pull back and I move my body forward. So sometimes just taking 1 or 2 steps forward, if you can do that in your environment, will relieve the pressure. Whoa! I move forward and I pull back. I'm relieving the pressure off of the rod, but I'm still getting the job done. Now I'm back in a 90-degree angle between the fish and my rod tip. Or if that fish really is pulling and I can't pull back and I can't catch up to the fish to come forward, then I'm going to use the fish's own momentum to bring him to the other side. Okay, this is a technique that you use on a regular fly rod. So I can pull back to the left if I trust my rod and I can maybe move forward, or I can simply flip my rod over using the fish's momentum and reestablish my 90 degrees on the opposite side. This is what you do on a rod and reel if you can't let a fish run. Maybe there's a log in the river or downstream and you can't let that fish run. You use the fish's momentum to turn and flip their head, right? Oh, this is just another fish on Tenkara. All right, let's talk about the landing. Okay, so before we go here, are there any questions about that fish management?
Eric, there's a video by Billy Pate on landing giant tarpon on fly rod, and some of these principles are the same principles.
They're exactly the same. So if you go fishing for tarpon or I don't know, a permit or GTs or whatever, a lot of times when you're on and you're managing and the fish is running and doing stuff, the guide will yell, put your rod opposite the fish, opposite the direction the fish is going. So if the fish is going left, I'm laying my rod to the right. If the fish turns around and starts running towards my rod, which will then create slack in my line, I'm going to lift my rod over and put it to the right. So the fish is this way, my rod is this way. No different than when a tarpon jumps. Tarpon jumps, your rod goes down as far as it can go, right? You're creating that triangle. You're making that 90 degrees. Here's my rod tip. There's the fish. Here's my angle, the angler, the third point. It's always that 90-degree angle. It doesn't matter if you are on a rod and reel or you are on a Tenkara rod. The difference is you're always doing that on a Tenkara rod.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. You have to be on Tenkara.
I'm sorry?
She can't hear you.
That's what I was about to say. It has to be done that way on Tenkara, or else you don't have a fish.
Right. And I'll say, like, so if you're on a rod and reel, I mean, this is like fish management 101, which, like, when we talk about fly fishing, everybody either thinks about casting or tying flies, right? That's where we always go when it comes to fly fishing. And we never really talk about fish management. And yet it really impacts outcome. A lot of people hook fish, but they don't land them. And it also impacts mortality rate of fish if we're doing catch and release. And we want to think about, releasing healthy fish. I've watched a lot of people lose fish that didn't need to lose them because they didn't know how to manage them, or they played them so much longer than they needed to. You want to play a fish to the point that you can manage and control the fish, but you don't want to play a fish to death, and then drag their tired ass in, to not be able to recover. Of course, unless you're going to eat it. But, we often, will play and run fish because we don't know what else to do with them. But if you imagine I'm on a river and, the water's going this way downstream, and there's a nice seam on the opposite side of the river, a really deep seam, faster moving water, and I keep seeing fish rise over there. I know there's fish in there. And also, there's a log. There's a tree that's fallen halfway across the river, about 60 feet downriver. I do my cast, and I'm on a rod and reel. I do my cast, and boom, I hook into a beautiful fish, rainbow. And he immediately wants to get into that fast current, and he's going to use that current to bury himself in that tree and break me off, right? That's life. That's fishing. I can't let that fish hit that tree. If that fish makes it to the tree, I lose this fish, and this fish is the fish of a lifetime. I want to do a grip and grim with this fish. So in a situation like that, it's a big fish. I should be able to let it run. Most people would want to let that fish run, but you can't. Maybe there's a spillway there, right? And rocks and falls, and you just know you're going to lose that fish if it gets down there. So the minute that fish starts to run, you're going to put your finger on that line, and you're going to keep that line from coming off your spool because he can't take 60 feet. And as soon as he starts to run in that heavy current, what do? Is it a lost situation? No. You stop the line and you turn the fish. You're going to use the fish's momentum to bring him out of that fast current into the softer water. When you lay your rod over, not letting him take another inch off of your line or your reel, the fish starts to turn in towards your rod. As he comes in towards your rod, you're going to have slack in your line. You don't want him to throw the hook. So as soon as he starts to come in and you feel that tension off of your line, you're going to put your rod back over to the side and reel him in and keep doing that and turning him and keeping him out of that fast water. That's how you manage a fish on a rod and reel. That's exactly what you're doing on a Tenkara rod. You're just doing it over and over. When a fish runs on a rod and a reel, that's a Hail Mary moment. We're not in control. If our drag is set properly on our reel, we are simply holding on by the tension the fish is causing by running with the hook in his mouth and pulling line until he gets tired. So we're just holding on at that moment. We're not in control. So I'm not going to catch a 15-pound permit on my Tenkara rod, or a 50-pound tarpon. But can I catch a 15-pound tarpon? Yeah. A 15-pound carp? Yeah, I can do that. Not on every Tenkara rod. Certain Tenkara rods are, designed for bigger fish or smaller fish, but they're much more capable than what people think. And it's all based on fish management. I want to show you. Are we doing okay?
Yes.
We're really short on time, so.
Okay, I want to show you a video. I think we have time. All right. Okay. So on a short line, this is basically how you would land a fish, and your fish would be there. I'm not very good at graphics, so I use this, but I use this partly to show that I have a problem here. In the second photo where the guy is grabbing the line, he's grabbing the line up high. And when he transfers that line from his left hand into his rod hand, as you can see in the third picture, he will pull the rod tip down and he will break his tip. So when you grab the line to pull your fish in, you want to bend and grab lower. If you grab low, then you'll release any pressure off your tip rather than adding more pressure to it. All right. This is what I call the helicopter move. This shows a landing. And just to give you a little heads up, I go in to land the fish. To the right of the screen, there's logs and sticks and crap in the water. I go in to land him, and he moves in a little bit towards me. So I step back out to reduce any slack in the line. And then I go to grab the line to pull him in, and he moves in the direction of my rod. So at the last minute, the fish starts to move, which collapses my 90-degree triangle. So I have to flip the rod to the other side in order to reestablish it. And I do have someone who nets the fish for me, but I didn't have the net. I could have easily netted the fish. You can see that the rod is really flexed in a nice open flex. It's not a candy cane. It's more like an arc. I go in, I step back out for a minute to make sure that I have pressure on the fish. I go in to grab, he moves, I switch to the other side, grab the line, transfer it to my other hand, and then just start to very easy and gradually hand line the fish in. So this is landing with a longer line. And that's a big salmon net. So it kind of dwarfs the fish, but that's a pretty big fish. We want to see that again, or are we pretty good?
Good.
All right, let me show you this. This is a carp.
She's running. We're okay.
He's trying to drag me to the other side where it's real deep. In a stronger current, it gets about 8 feet.
So there's a lot of branches and stuff and rocks on the other side. That's where he's trying to go. And it's a deep channel. And so I am trying to keep him away from there. Not ready yet. Trying to get into that deep water.
See my rod wet, current. I'm going to the side. My tip is almost straight.
And I'm just trying to keep my rod in the power curve. You might want to come from a different the front. He's big. Not quite ready to grab that line. I'm waiting for him just to take a little break where maybe I can come in and grab that line.
Get that to line. Get that line.
Well, come in too quickly.
Oh.
Oh, that's a big boy.
So that just kind of shows you, I mean, that just one fish. He's certainly not the biggest fish I've landed, but a respectable fish. But you noticed how my rod was really curved. The tip was almost straight. I was using the entire rod. And that's where you get your power from. And hand lining is pretty easy. It's not very, it's not that hard. It's not a complicated thing to do. I have a few other videos, but I think we're probably running out of time that just show landings. But if you want to see another video or not, or we can just answer some questions.
Got a question. Where does a person go to learn how to, or to have a first Tenkara experience? How do you go do that?
Well, we still struggle with fly shops, really wanting to support Tenkara. We do in Colorado, I give lessons. I give group and private lessons. I have a couple scheduled this week. Often different organizations will bring me in to do, like a clinic or a seminar. Usually it's, like a day of instruction and casting, and then another day if there's access on the water. I've done that in a couple of different places. A fly shop in Indiana brings me out almost every year, and we do one night in the fly shop with, with sort of the classroom part of it, and then the next day we all meet on the river and fish. There are no trout in Indiana. So we chase other things. The fly fishing shows will be at the Atlanta fly fishing show. We do demos. I will often do classes at the fly fishing show, 3-hour classes. But it really, there aren't a lot of, we do have programs to certify guides. We'll do classes if we have enough interest, or fly shops will bring us out and we will certify their guides, and then, promote them as a Tenkara friendly shop and a place to, that'll offer guided trips, Tenkara trips. So, we have a number of fly shops locally or outfitters that we call Tenkara friendly. And they're versed and comfortable in Tenkara, but honestly, it's hard because a lot of the fly shops and outfitters are kind of resistant to doing Tenkara still.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Karen, I have a quick question. You said hand lining was easy. Every time with my traditional fly rod and reel and 5X tippet or something like that, and I try to hand line a fish in from 3 or 4 feet away, I break my tippet off. So do you have heavier tippet you use, or a different technique on hand lining? How does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a balancing act. You have to know when to be able to, that you think you can pull the fish in. There have been times when I've grabbed that line to bring the fish in, started to bring the fish in, and it was like, lo and behold, he's going to run, and so I have to drop the line and put him back on the reel. I'm sorry, not on the reel, drop the line, put him back on the rod. And that flex also acts as a little bit as your drag system, so it's a give and take. But I will say, for one thing, you have to be able to be willing to move with the fish, so to speak. There are times when you can't. I mean, I bone fish from a flats boat. And certainly in those situations, you're kind of limited. You can't, you can't move. You've got the bow of the boat, basically. I've lost fish, just like I've lost fish on rod and reels. But if I have an opportunity, so I guess as a principle, I will always use the heaviest tippet that I can, whether I'm on a Tenkara rod or a rod and reel, and still catch fish. I guess, like, I don't want to catch a 24-inch rainbow on 7X tippet because, I mean, unless you're planning on eating it, that fish is never going to recover from that fight. You just have to, to finesse that fish for so long that I think it's not really valuable. So I don't think you should horse fish in. I don't want to rip lips or do anything like that. But, if I can use 4X tippet and still get hits and be effective, with my flies, then I'm going to use 4X tippet. If I have to move down to 5X tippet, then I have to be really, really careful if I hook into something really big. And that's where, people talk about the art and science of fly fishing. It's sort of the art. That's the finesse play. It's being able to let your rod flex and absorb some of that. And also, if you have the ability to move around safely with that fish, to take some steps, be willing to move. When I fish a lot of Tenkara, and then I go back onto my rod and reel, particularly in freshwater, I'm sometimes amazed that it's like, I can stand almost in the same spot, all day. And of course I can cast into different places. But because I have that reel, I can be stationary a lot of the time. It's pretty rare that I actually have to move my feet. I mean, there are a handful of times when I've like hooked into a massive fish that has taken me into backing, and I've had to, run through the water in order to keep up with it. Because the farther the fish gets away from you, the harder it is to land. Your chances of landing that fish decreases, with every foot that they get farther away from you. So I would say yes. Sometimes, like if I'm bone fishing on my Tenkara rod, and everybody is using 10x tippet, I will probably use 12x and see if I can still, be successful.
Got it. That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. So good.
Let me just say this, Karin has an offer for club members, 20% off of any Tenkara products or rods. Is it rods or products?
Rods.
Okay, through the rest of this month, right?
Yes, it's for a short period of time, just because we're going to be getting into some holiday things. But I think it's for the next, is it week? Maybe 2 weeks?
September 30th, you said.
Okay, I don't remember. I can extend it another week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's make it October 7th. How's that?
Okay, okay. You should send me an email.
Okay, I will. I'll send you an email October 7th, and we'll have our website on our website posted there.
Okay.
So you can go to the website and check everything out. Karin, thank you so much for this presentation.
That was really
Okay.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, we can't hear you right now.
We have a YouTube channel that has some videos, and our blog on our website has some, interesting, I think, informative articles as well. And I'm always available to answer questions, or if you have questions or wonderings, or if you try Tenkara and then you're struggling with something, I try to respond to everybody myself, and I will put up my information as my last slide, and I'll but it'll have my email address if you want to reach out. So here it is. Thank you guys so much for having me, and I hope it was useful.
Yes, very informative.
Even a little bit, for some regular fishing, maybe. There's my information. So feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks for having me. And I will push that through to October 7th. So
All right, that's great.
All right. Sounds
Thank
great.
you. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
you're
Have a
welcome.
good evening.
All right, you too.
Folks, we're going to sign off from here too. Aaron Anthony. Good to see y'all.